I never thought a single moment could rewrite the way I see my own family. My name is Leah, I'm 28 years old, and until yesterday, I believed I understood my family, what loyalty meant, what sacrifice looked like. I lived with the unspoken rules: keep your temper in check, pay when you can, and never question your mother's judgments. That all ended in one sharp, echoing slap right across the side of my face, in the middle of our tiny, dimly lit kitchen. My brother had been sitting at the table, smirking in a way that made my stomach churn, and my mother, well, I had never seen her like that. Not in my life. And yet, here she was, voice raised, hand outstretched, and everything I thought I knew about home shattered in an instant. Before you think this is just another family argument, let me be clear. This slap wasn't just a reaction. It was years of tension condensed into a single act. It wasn't about money alone, or even my brother's divorce. It was about loyalty, expectations, and the invisible chains I had been carrying without realizing it. I want you to stick around and hear the full story, because what happened next would reach 5 different judges, and I never expected a voice memo to become the silent witness to my life. But before we go there, I want to ask, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about family drama, emotional courage, and personal boundaries. The morning started like any other Saturday, with the sun slipping through the blinds and dust motes dancing lazily in the golden light. I had been sipping my black coffee, scrolling through emails on my phone, and thinking about the errands I needed to run. My brother, Jason, had been texting nonstop about his divorce proceedings. He wanted me to fund his lawyer's fees. And of course, my mom had overheard a part of our conversation. The tension in our house wasn't new, but that day, it thickened, almost palpable, like a storm cloud ready to break. Jason leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, smirking. "Come on, Leah," he said, the corner of his mouth twitching with impatience. "It's just a few thousand. You're always helping everyone else. Why not me?" I felt a familiar pang of frustration. I had been helping quietly for years, small loans covering emergency bills, babysitting when needed. But this was different. This time, I was financially stretched thin. My student loans, rent, and car repairs were piling up. I had said no before, and I could say it again. I tried to explain it calmly, but my words were drowned by the background noise of our cramped kitchen, the fridge humming, dishes clinking, and the soft ticking of the wall clock. "I'm sorry, Jason," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I just can't do it this time. I don't have the money. You'll have to find another way." That's when my mom, who had been standing near the sink washing dishes, finally snapped. Her hands trembled slightly, soap bubbles slipping through her fingers. "What do you mean you can't?" she demanded, her voice louder than I had ever heard it. "Your brother is family. You're supposed to help. You're selfish." Her words hit me like a cold slap before the physical one even arrived. I opened my mouth to respond, to reason with her, but the argument had already escalated beyond logic. Jason leaned forward, grinning in that irritating, self-assured way he always did, and I realized something inside me shifted. And then, before I could even brace myself, my mom's hand shot out. The slap landed with a sharp crack across my cheek. Time slowed for a moment, the sound echoing in the small kitchen, bouncing off the cupboards and tiled floor. I staggered back, slightly gripping the edge of the counter for support. My heart was hammering in my chest. I could feel the sting, but more than that, I felt the weight of every unspoken expectation, every resentment, every moment I had been told to sacrifice without question. It all came crashing down in that instant. My hand went to my face instinctively, and I could see the mixture of anger, shame, and disbelief reflected in the stainless steel refrigerator door. Jason didn't move. He just stared, eyes wide, like he couldn't believe what he was witnessing either. The smug expression vanished from his face, replaced by a mix of guilt and apprehension. "Mom, Leah," he said, his voice faltering. I couldn't speak. I was too shocked. My chest heaved with a mix of fear and fury. I wanted to scream, to run, to cry, but I did something I hadn't done before. I reached for my phone. I had started recording our conversations months ago, after therapy had suggested keeping a voice diary in case things ever escalated. And now, without thinking, I hit record. For the next several minutes, I listened as my mother continued, tears now rolling down her cheeks, berating me for not supporting the family. Jason tried to interject, to soften the tone, but she waved him away. Every word, every inflection, every tremor of anger or desperation was captured by my phone, silently witnessing what no one else could prove. The kitchen felt smaller, almost suffocating. The smell of burnt coffee lingered from my cup, mixing with the faint aroma of dish soap and stale bread. Sunlight glinted off the countertop, highlighting the lines of frustration etched across my mother's face. She looked so human in her rage, yet so cruel at the same time. I realized then that love and abuse can look eerily similar, especially in families where loyalty is demanded, not earned. After the slap, I finally found my voice, though it trembled. "Mom, you can't," I began, but she cut me off. "You're ruining this family," she shouted, voice breaking. "You're choosing yourself over your brother. Do you even care about us?" Jason, still seated, whispered, "Leah, maybe we should just drop it," but his words didn't reach me. I was consumed by the injustice of being attacked, for saying no. My own mother's hand had left a mark on my face, but the deeper mark was emotional. The betrayal that the person who was supposed to protect me had instead attacked me over money. For a moment, I thought about running away, just leaving the house and never looking back. But my feet were rooted to the tile, as if the floor itself was holding me accountable for something I hadn't done. Then, in the silence that followed her tirade, I realized something. The recording I had started for myself had become a lifeline. It wasn't just about capturing words. It was about capturing truth, the truth that I might need when no one else believed me. Jason finally stood, holding his hands up. "Mom, Leah's not wrong. She's trying to survive, too," he said cautiously. His voice trembled slightly, betraying the nervousness he always seemed to hide behind sarcasm. She turned on him then, eyes blazing. "You too, Jason? You're siding with her now? After everything I've done for you? After everything I've sacrificed?" It felt like the walls themselves were shrinking, pressing in with the weight of our anger, history, and unspoken expectations. I wanted to cry, scream, beg, or fight back. I wasn't sure which emotion came first, but the recording continued quietly in my hand, silent and patient, catching every note, every sigh, every sound of betrayal. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, my mother stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind her. Jason stayed behind. Uneasy, he avoided my gaze. "Leah, I didn't mean," he trailed off. I just sat down at the kitchen table, hand pressed to my cheek, phone in the other. The sting of the slap was fading, but the emotional wound was raw and throbbing. I thought about how this single moment, one act of physical aggression, could ripple into months, maybe years of change. Little did I know that tiny device in my hand would carry this moment into the eyes of 5 different judges, each interpreting our fractured family in ways I couldn't even imagine. In that moment, I also thought about the life I had been living, the constant giving, the constant bending to family expectations, the silent sacrifices that no one acknowledged. I realized I had spent too long letting others dictate my worth. And now, staring at the faint bruise forming on my cheek, I knew this was the turning point. The slap had changed everything, not just because of pain, but because it forced me to see myself, my family, and my limits with unflinching clarity. By the time I finally stood to rinse my face in the sink, I had made a quiet, internal promise. I would no longer allow fear, guilt, or familial obligation to decide my life. The recording was safe on my phone, waiting, silent but powerful. It wasn't just a digital file. It was a testament to truth, a shield I hadn't asked for but desperately needed. Even now, recounting that morning, the memory of the slap sends a shiver down my spine. The crack of skin against skin, the harsh words, the stunned silence afterward. It all plays in my mind like a slow-motion movie. And yet, amidst the shock and betrayal, I felt a strange clarity, a quiet knowledge that for the first time I was seeing my family and myself clearly. Leaning against the counter, I took a deep breath. The sun had shifted slightly, casting long, golden stripes across the linoleum floor. My cheek throbbed, but my mind was sharp, alert, and strangely calm. The kitchen was quiet now, save for the hum of the fridge and the faint ticking of the clock. And I knew that what had begun with a slap had become the first chapter in a story that would reach courts, judges, and ultimately my own sense of self-respect. I pressed my cheek against the cool tile of the kitchen floor, feeling the lingering sting and the warmth of my own tears. My phone rested beside me, screen illuminated, its small red recording icon blinking steadily. It had captured everything, every sharp word, every tremor in my mother's voice, every subtle inflection in my brother's uneasy responses. At first, I didn't move. I just stared at the blinking light, the room silent except for the distant hum of the refrigerator. The recording had become more than a file. It was a witness to my truth, a quiet, digital confessor that no one could dispute. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, it was hard to tell. I stayed in that same position, too exhausted to move, but too alert to rest. Every memory from the kitchen replayed in my mind. The slamming of the cabinet doors, the smell of burnt toast mingled with the lingering coffee, the faint metallic scent of tension that seemed to hang in the air. I could still feel the weight of my mother's hand, the sting that refused to fade. And yet something inside me was shifting. I realized that this recording might be my only leverage in a family that had long ignored my boundaries. I finally forced myself to my feet, walking slowly to the counter to rinse my cheek under the cold tap. The water shocked me, bringing a jolt of clarity. My reflection in the small kitchen window startled me. There was a vulnerability I hadn't acknowledged before, but also a strange glint of determination. I wrapped a towel around my face, listening carefully for any sounds of movement in the house. Jason was upstairs, probably on the phone, with his lawyer again. My mother's bedroom door remained closed, muffling any hint of what she might be plotting next. I sat down at the small kitchen table, my phone now in my hands like a lifeline. I replayed the recording once, then twice, and with each playback, my emotions churned. I was angry at my mother, furious at Jason, but more than anything, I felt a profound sense of betrayal. Not just the slap, but the accusation that I was selfish for finally prioritizing myself. It cut deeper than any physical pain. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the audio, noticing small things I had missed in the heat of the moment. The almost imperceptible shake in my mother's voice, the way Jason's tone softened when he realized he might have pushed too far. I knew I couldn't keep it to myself, but sharing it was terrifying. What if my mother found out? What if Jason resented me forever? I debated whether to send it to a trusted friend first, someone who could advise me, without judgment. After a few minutes, I decided on Sarah, my college roommate and lifelong confidant. She had a level head, a sense of empathy that balanced honesty, and she had always encouraged me to stand up for myself. I hesitated as I composed the message. Hey, I need to show you something. It's about what happened today. Please listen before you say anything. My finger hovered over the send button. With a deep breath, I pressed it, watching the small checkmark confirm it was sent. Instantly, my chest tightened, as if I had released a caged animal inside me. I tried to distract myself by tidying the kitchen, wiping the counters, and rinsing the coffee stains from the table, but every mundane task felt heavy, almost ceremonial, as if I was performing a ritual of endurance. While waiting for Sarah's response, I reflected on the family dynamics that had led me here. My mother had always equated love with sacrifice. Every birthday, every holiday, every financial emergency, it had been about giving, giving, and giving again. And I had complied, believing that obedience was a form of affection. Jason had grown up expecting this compliance, using charm and guilt to extract what he wanted. And I had been complicit, quietly resentful, but too afraid to confront the imbalance. The recording now felt like a revelation of all those years of silent compliance, a tangible proof that I had finally said no, even in the face of aggression. Sarah's message pinged, breaking my spiraling thoughts. Leah, I listened. This is serious. You need to protect yourself. You were not in the wrong. Keep it safe. This could be important. Her words hit me like a bomb, simultaneously comforting and unnerving. The idea that a simple phone recording could carry weight beyond my control filled me with both hope and anxiety. Could this really matter outside our home? Could a judge, a lawyer, or someone in authority understand what I had experienced without seeing the bruise, without hearing the tone, without feeling the tension that had been suffocating me for years? I decided to make copies, not physical, of course, but encrypted files, backups, emails to myself. Each step was deliberate, almost ritualistic, like a soldier preparing for battle. I labeled each file carefully, noting the date and time, and stored them in a secure folder. My hands shook slightly with adrenaline and fear. I was crossing a line I had never considered before, documenting family conflict in a way that could be used outside the house. But a part of me also recognized the necessity of proof, the way truth often needed a witness when the people you loved most had become blind to it. As the afternoon faded into evening, I began to notice small details I hadn't before. The faint scratch on the edge of the counter from where my mother had gestured angrily, the tilt of the kitchen clock that seemed to lean toward me, almost mocking me with its steady ticking. Even the hum of the refrigerator now sounded like a metronome marking the tension that had filled our home for decades. I replayed the recording again, this time listening for the pauses, the hesitations, the tiny shifts that revealed character and intention. Every replay brought new insights. A subtle inflection of guilt in Jason's voice, the tremor in my mother's tone when she realized she had crossed a line. The hours passed, and I felt a strange solitude settle around me. It was not loneliness exactly, but a weighty awareness that I had taken a step no one else in the family would take. I was alone in documenting reality, alone in facing the potential consequences. And yet there was an empowering clarity in that solitude. I realized that this recording, these minutes of sound, were my story, unfiltered and raw. And for the first time, I recognized that my voice, my perspective, had value. Small, almost imperceptible incidents began to unfold around me, reinforcing the gravity of what had happened. A light bulb flickered above the sink, casting long shadows across the floor, making the kitchen feel both familiar and alien. The dog, Max, who usually slept in the corner, got up and nudged my leg, sensing my heightened emotions. I stroked his fur, absently, grounding myself as the enormity of the situation pressed in. Every sound, every movement became a part of the atmosphere, an invisible audience to the storm I had captured in digital form. By nighttime, my mother had gone to bed, though I could hear her door click shut. Jason remained upstairs, presumably on a call with his attorney, muttering arguments and half-hearted apologies. I sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, replaying the recording one last time before sleep. It was almost meditative, listening to the intensity, the anger, the raw honesty. I realized I had never truly heard my mother in this way before. Not just her words, but the undercurrents of fear, frustration, and misplaced expectations. The recording wasn't just a tool for protection. It was a lens into her humanity, flawed and intense, just like mine. I finally closed my eyes and leaned back in the chair, allowing exhaustion to overtake me. Sleep was fitful, haunted by fragments of the day. The sting of the slap, the echo of accusations, the silent strength of the recording. I dreamed of small, ordinary acts transformed into powerful statements. Hands reaching out and recoiling, words spoken and recorded, lives hanging in delicate balance. When I woke the next morning, the first thought that crossed my mind was the recording. It wasn't just a relic of anger. It was a declaration that I would no longer be silenced. Over the next few days, I began observing my family more acutely. I noticed the subtle tension in Jason's posture, the slight avoidance in his gaze. My mother's expressions were softer, yet guarded, as if she sensed that her actions had been recorded, her fury now captured for posterity. I didn't confront them immediately. I let the recording exist quietly, like a shadow in the room, influencing dynamics without explicit acknowledgement. It was a strange power, silent, undeniable, and wholly mine. During these days, I also revisited the recording with a new perspective. Each playback revealed details I hadn't noticed. The way my mother's words softened briefly when she realized I wasn't caving, the hesitation in Jason's tone when he realized he might have pushed too far, the faint intake of breath I had taken when the slap landed. These small elements painted a fuller picture, a narrative of pressure, expectation, and unspoken family rules. I began transcribing parts of it in a journal, not as evidence for anyone, but to process my own emotions, to untangle the complex threads of love, obligation, and resentment. And yet, alongside clarity came fear. I worried about what could happen if anyone found out. Could my mother retaliate? Could Jason see it as betrayal? The shadows of consequence loomed over me, but I realized that fear alone could no longer dictate my actions. I had seen the line I needed to draw, and the recording was both my witness and my shield. Small acts of normalcy, making coffee, doing the dishes, walking Max, became acts of quiet defiance. I felt a subtle strength growing in me, rooted in the knowledge that I had documented truth, that my perspective mattered, and that I could face whatever consequences might arise. The shadows of the recording were no longer frightening. They were a steady presence, a reminder that even in the chaos of family, I had agency. By the end of the week, the recording had become more than audio. It was a compass guiding me through interactions, helping me maintain boundaries, and shaping the way I navigated my home. Every glance from my mother, every tentative step by Jason, carried a subtle acknowledgement of the moment we could no longer ignore. And in those quiet shadows, I discovered something unexpected. Resilience. Not loud, not flashy, but a deep, unwavering sense of self that no slap, no argument, and no expectation could erase. The calm I had found in the quiet shadows of the kitchen didn't last long. I had barely begun to settle into my newfound sense of clarity and quiet resilience when the first knock on the door arrived. It was sharp, deliberate, and carried a weight I hadn't expected. I froze for a moment, my hand tightening around Max's leash. He barked once, low and wary, as if sensing the tension that had suddenly filled the house. My heart pounded against my ribs, a rapid drumbeat that mirrored the storm I was about to enter. When I opened the door, there stood a young woman in a sharply pressed suit, holding a legal folder and a clipboard. "Leah Mitchell," she asked, her tone polite but firm. "I'm from the law firm representing your brother's divorce proceedings. We need to speak with you regarding financial support and family testimony." My stomach dropped. The recording, my silent digital witness, had already begun to move beyond the shadows. Somehow, what I had captured in a moment of fear and defiance was now official evidence in a real legal matter. I invited her in, hands shaking, while Max sniffed at her shoes, unsure whether to bark or retreat. She introduced herself as Rachel, and without small talk, she explained the situation. Multiple hearings, documentation, and the critical need for witnesses who could attest to family dynamics, communication patterns, and financial responsibility. Jason, when he heard her voice, immediately appeared at the top of the stairs, his expression unreadable. "Leah, what's going on?" he asked cautiously. He hadn't expected this escalation. His divorce, which he had treated as a personal affair, was now entangling every member of our household. And suddenly, my role had shifted from reluctant sibling to potential key witness, a position I hadn't prepared for. Rachel asked me to sit at the small kitchen table. She spread out documents, legal forms, and affidavits, all marked with formal stamps and signatures. The sight of these papers, so precise, so deliberate, was unnerving. This wasn't just an argument between family members anymore. It was a legal storm brewing with potential consequences, each document a raindrop signaling the flood to come. I had to make decisions quickly. How honest could I be without risking my own relationships? How much of the truth could I reveal? And how far would I allow this storm to take me? As Rachel explained the legal requirements, I realized that every statement, every recollection, and every small detail could influence multiple hearings. My recording of the slap and the confrontation with my mother was no longer a private artifact. It was now evidence that could determine outcomes related to custody discussions, financial obligations, and family credibility. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me, and I felt a surge of fear intertwined with a flicker of power. This was my truth against years of assumption and expectation, and it demanded careful handling. Jason, surprisingly quiet during the explanation, finally muttered, "Leah, you didn't have to record all that, did you?" His voice was defensive but tinged with worry. I looked at him and said firmly, "I had to, Jason. It's the only way the truth could be seen, even when no one else wants to admit it." He looked away, the silence heavy between us. It was clear he hadn't fully grasped the ripple effect his choices had created. Over the next few days, the household shifted into a tense, unspoken rhythm. Every conversation, glance, and interaction seemed charged with implication. My mother avoided eye contact entirely, moving through the rooms like a ghost of her former self, careful to avoid triggering confrontation. Jason retreated further into his room, muttering arguments into the phone with his attorney, seemingly unaware that the family had already become evidence in their own right. And I navigated the house cautiously, aware that a single word or gesture could be interpreted, documented, and potentially used in court. In the evenings, I replayed the recording again, this time listening not just for the slap, but for nuances in tone, hesitations, and pauses. Each playback revealed subtleties I had missed before. The almost imperceptible shake in my mother's voice as she argued, Jason's flicker of guilt when he realized how his pressure had pushed me to my limits, and my own subtle intake of breath when fear and anger collided. I began making notes in a small journal, each line a reflection, each observation a record of behavior and intent. I realized that the legal storm wasn't just external, it was forcing me to analyze my family with a lens I had avoided for years. Rachel returned a few days later, carrying updated paperwork. "We've scheduled preliminary depositions," she said, her voice clipped but careful. Judges will need statements on multiple issues: family finances, household dynamics, and emotional interactions. My pulse quickened. I hadn't expected my private documentation to reach this level of formal scrutiny. I glanced at Jason, who shifted uncomfortably in the corner. He muttered, "This is bigger than I thought." I spent the next hours reviewing the documents, trying to make sense of the legal jargon, the requests for testimony, and the questions that would be posed. Each paragraph forced me to relive moments I had tried to forget, past arguments about money, subtle manipulations masked as concern, my mother's relentless insistence that family always comes first. The wait was exhausting, but I knew the only way forward was to meet the storm head-on. Small incidents continued to unfold, each adding layers to the tension. I overheard my mother whispering to Jason late at night, her words hushed but laced with frustration. "She's making this bigger than it is. You have to tell them it's not that serious." Jason's reply was equally quiet but filled with unease. "I don't know what to say." "Leah, she's prepared." I can't." Listening from the shadows, I felt a mixture of vindication and apprehension. The stakes were higher than I had imagined. I began practicing my statements aloud, rehearsing the words I might speak in court, the tone I would use, and the pauses I needed to convey honesty without aggression. Speaking them aloud in the empty living room, I realized that the recording had already shaped my perspective, guiding me toward clarity I hadn't had before. Each word reinforced my understanding. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, boundaries, and accountability. Then came the first minor twist. An unexpected phone call from Jason's attorney changed the dynamic entirely. "Ms. Mitchell," the voice said formally, "we have reason to believe there may be documentation, including audio recordings relevant to your brother's case. Are you prepared to submit these?" My heart raced. The quiet act of recording my mother's slap had now moved into the official legal sphere. I knew at that moment that every decision I made from here on would carry consequences beyond the home. The days became a careful balancing act. I navigated family interactions with a heightened awareness, choosing words deliberately, watching expressions, and noting microbehaviors. A spilled cup of coffee, a sigh, a flinch. Every action could be analyzed, interpreted, and questioned. I began journaling each event, recording timelines and emotional responses, creating a personal map of the household under pressure. Max seemed to sense the change as well. He stayed close, nudging me when tension rose, grounding me with the warmth of his presence. By midweek, I had been contacted by a court liaison to schedule a preliminary statement. The anxiety was suffocating, but I focused on preparation. I spent late nights typing out notes, transcribing parts of the original recording, and organizing my thoughts to ensure accuracy, clarity, and emotional honesty. I also consulted Sarah multiple times. Her advice pragmatic and supportive. "Stay factual. Leah, don't embellish. Speak your truth calmly. They can only interpret what you give them." Even small domestic incidents now carried enormous weight. When my mother dropped a dish, I didn't sigh or scold. I paused, noting her reaction, the tension in her shoulders. When Jason muttered an offhand comment about finances, I recorded the inflection, not to trap him, but to understand context, patterns, and motives. Each observation became part of the legal mosaic, a subtle but crucial element in the storm building around us. The recording itself, once a private artifact, now felt almost alive. Its presence influenced our household like a silent mediator. My mother spoke more cautiously, Jason's smugness faded into unease, and I found an unexpected confidence. I wasn't just a participant in the proceedings anymore. I was a guardian of truth, wielding evidence with care, sensitivity, and purpose. I realized the storm wasn't something to fear. It was something I could navigate, shape, and endure. As the preliminary dates approached, Rachel returned with final instructions. Judges will want precise accounts, timelines, and context. Review everything. Your testimony will set the tone for how they interpret the family dynamics. My chest tightened, but I also felt a deep steadiness. The preparation, the reflection, the recording, and the journals had given me an unshakable foundation. I understood the family, the patterns, and my own limits in a way I never had before. Even as the legal storm continued to gather strength, I felt ready. The path ahead was uncertain, the outcomes unpredictable, but for the first time in my adult life, I had clarity, purpose, and the courage to face what was coming. The shadows of the recording, the weight of testimony, and the unspoken tensions of my household had all converged into a singular truth. I would speak honestly, protect my boundaries, and navigate the storm with integrity. The day I walked into the courthouse, I felt an almost physical pressure in my chest, as though the walls themselves were pressing in. The echo of my footsteps on the polished tile seemed louder than usual, reverberating through the quiet hallways like a countdown. The lobby smelled faintly of disinfectant and old wood polish, and I caught a glimpse of families huddled in whispered conversations, some anxious, others resigned. I clutched my folder close, the phone recording tucked inside, a small, pulsating heartbeat of truth in my bag. As I passed through security, my mind raced. Each beep of the scanner and shuffle of papers heightened my awareness of the weight I carried. 5 judges, I had been told, would eventually hear pieces of this moment, each one in a different courtroom, each interpreting the same voice in unique ways. The thought was dizzying. This was no longer a personal issue, no longer a family argument. The recording, that tiny digital shadow of a slap, had become a force that could reshape perceptions, judgments, and relationships. I was ushered into a waiting area, a small room lined with chairs and a low coffee table stacked with magazines I had no interest in reading. The other families didn't notice me, absorbed in their own concerns. I tried to steady my breathing, reminding myself that I was prepared, that the recordings and notes I had painstakingly compiled gave me a foundation. But even so, anxiety clung to me like a second skin. I could feel Max's memory, the dog's unwavering loyalty, comforting me as I silently imagined him by my side, grounding me in the storm to come. The first courtroom was smaller than I expected. Judge Whitman sat behind the bench, papers neatly stacked, eyes calm yet sharp. My lawyer, Rachel, gave me a reassuring nod, and I took a seat in the witness area. My voice trembled slightly as she whispered, "Just state the facts. Let the recording speak, when necessary. Stick to what you know." I nodded, gripping my folder tightly. The red light on my phone seemed to glow even through the bag, reminding me of the moments captured, of the truth finally ready to be acknowledged. When my turn came, I recounted the morning of the slap. I described the argument, the tone of my mother's voice, Jason's reactions, the physical strike itself. I spoke deliberately, aware of each word's weight, noting the inflections, hesitations, and the underlying tension that the recording captured. The judge leaned forward, eyes fixed, absorbing the gravity of every detail. I handed over the phone when instructed, and as the recording played, the room fell into an almost sacred silence. Every cough, every subtle shift seemed magnified, the sound bouncing off the wood-paneled walls. Judge Whitman's expression remained neutral, but I caught a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Not sympathy, exactly, but an acknowledgement of the complexity, the ordinary family drama elevated by a moment of extraordinary clarity. After the session, the judge asked a few questions about the circumstances leading to the slap, the family's financial expectations, and my motivations for recording. I answered carefully, honestly, and without embellishment. The weight lifted slightly, as I realized that the recording allowed me to communicate what words alone could not. Over the next several days, the recording traveled, becoming the center of proceedings in 4 more courtrooms. Judge Rivera in the financial hearing listened intently, pausing the playback multiple times to examine subtle tones. He asked about Jason's repeated requests for money and my responses, and I explained without defensiveness, recounting the pressure I felt and the limits I had to set. The recording, once a quiet act of self-protection, had now become a window into family dynamics that no one could ignore. Small, unpredictable incidents continued to unfold. In Judge Mitchell's courtroom, the recording sparked an unexpected discussion about emotional influence and coercion within families. Lawyers debated subtle cues, how hesitation, tone, and silence could reveal manipulation or pressure. Each judge interpreted the same audio differently, yet all recognized the core truth. The incident was not an exaggeration or misunderstanding, but a moment of undeniable tension and boundary violation. In Judge Allen's court, the recording was used to corroborate testimony regarding household finances. Jason's lawyer tried to downplay the argument, framing it as a minor dispute, but the recording told a different story. Every sharp word, every trembling syllable, contrasted with the narrative Jason's attorney presented. The judge paused the playback twice, asking me for clarification on specific phrases, and I explained them with honesty and calmness. I felt a mixture of nervousness and empowerment. Each courtroom, each judge confirmed the legitimacy of my experience, turning a personal confrontation into a public acknowledgement of truth. Between hearings, the household continued to shift in my absence. My mother moved more cautiously, almost as though she could sense the recording's power even from miles away. Jason called once, voice soft, hesitant, apologetic. "Leah, I didn't expect it to go this far," he said. I stayed firm, replying, "It's not about punishment, Jason. It's about boundaries and truth." The words felt heavier than any slap, stronger than any argument. They were a declaration that I would no longer be silenced or manipulated. Returning to the courthouse for Judge Simmons' session, I noticed subtle changes in my own demeanor. I spoke with more confidence, each word deliberate, each pause purposeful. I realized that the experience of facing multiple judges had reshaped me, giving clarity to emotions I had previously buried beneath guilt and compliance. When the recording played, the room responded with attentive silence. Even Jason's attorney seemed to hesitate before questioning, aware that every word I had captured was precise, undeniable. Unexpectedly, small technical issues created tension during one session. The playback paused mid-sentence, the judges exchanging glances, waiting for a smooth continuation. I felt a surge of panic, fearing the momentary glitch might diminish the recording's impact. But Rachel calmly restarted the file, and the moment resumed seamlessly. Even the interruption highlighted the fragility of evidence, the importance of timing, and the necessity of preparation. It reminded me that truth must be presented carefully, even when reality itself is fragile. During a break, I sat quietly in the empty hallway, replaying moments in my mind. Each courtroom had interpreted the same recording differently, emphasizing varying elements: financial pressure, emotional intensity, familial expectation, or physical violation. And yet, all 5 judges had arrived at a similar understanding that boundaries had been crossed, emotions had been manipulated, and my perspective had value. I felt a profound sense of validation. For the first time, my voice, previously dismissed or ignored, was recognized as credible, meaningful, and influential. The final courtroom session brought a twist I hadn't anticipated. Judge Thompson requested an additional explanation regarding subtle background noises, the clink of dishes, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the pauses in conversation. These small elements, previously unnoticed, were now analyzed for context, revealing patterns of tension, escalation, and control. I described the sounds, the positioning of my mother, Jason's posture, and the subtle gestures that accompanied the argument. The judge leaned back, nodding slowly. "Sometimes it's the quiet details that speak the loudest," he remarked. Each playback seemed to layer more weight onto my shoulders, but instead of fear, I felt empowerment. The experience highlighted the power of evidence, observation, and meticulous documentation. It was no longer just about the slap, the argument, or financial disputes. It was about accountability, clarity, and the ability to present an unaltered truth. My heart still raced during each session, but I found a calm underneath the adrenaline, a sense of purpose that guided every word I spoke and every answer I gave. By the end of the week, all 5 judges had heard the recording. Each courtroom presented its own perspective, but together they formed a mosaic of understanding, piecing together my family's complex dynamics. The ripple effect was profound. Jason became more cautious, my mother more introspective, and I discovered a new depth of courage, resilience, and clarity. I realized that truth, even captured in a simple voice memo, could transcend the personal and shape the official. Returning home that evening, I felt a strange combination of exhaustion and liberation. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee from the morning, and the sunlight slanted through the blinds, dust motes dancing as they always had. But the house no longer felt suffocating. There was a subtle shift in energy, a quiet acknowledgement that boundaries were now visible, that my voice had been heard, and that the dynamics had irrevocably changed. I pulled out my phone, listening to the recording one last time in that quiet moment. The slap, the words, the pauses, they were all there, unchanged, undeniable, and powerful. I realized that this simple device, once a tool for private reflection, had become a conduit for justice, understanding, and personal transformation. 5 judges, 5 interpretations, 1 voice. And that voice, my voice, was finally acknowledged. The day I returned home after the final courtroom session, the air felt different, almost electric, with quiet possibility. The recording that had carried my truth to 5 judges now rested safely on my phone, yet its presence lingered like an invisible force shaping the room. I set my bag down on the kitchen table, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, noticing the subtle changes in my surroundings. Even the sunlight filtering through the blinds seemed softer, as if the house itself had exhaled. Jason emerged from his room, unusually subdued. His eyes met mine for a brief moment, carrying a mixture of guilt, respect, and uncertainty. "Leah, I didn't know it would go this far," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, aware that words could not undo the past, nor could they erase the tension that had built for years. "It's not about punishment," I replied, choosing calm over anger. "It's about understanding, about boundaries." His gaze lingered, thoughtful, before he quietly retreated to his room again, leaving me with a sense of fragile peace and lingering unease. My mother appeared in the doorway shortly after, her expression unreadable. She hesitated, then took a slow, measured step inside. "Leah, can we talk?" she asked softly, almost vulnerable in a way I had never seen before. I nodded, motioning for her to sit at the kitchen table. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the unspoken acknowledgement of the recording, the court sessions, and the transformations they had initiated. I didn't realize how much I was hurting everyone," she admitted, her voice quivering. "I thought I was protecting you, guiding you, but I see now that my actions were wrong." Her words were not an apology in the dramatic sense. They were small, deliberate admissions of self-awareness. I felt the sting of past conflicts, but also a cautious sense of relief. The legal storm had forced clarity, but the real challenge lay in rebuilding trust and understanding within the family. Over the next few days, I noticed subtle changes in the household. Jason approached me cautiously in the kitchen one morning, holding a cup of coffee as though offering a truce. I wanted to thank you for being honest, he said quietly. I know I pushed too hard, and you were right to set boundaries. I accepted the gesture, acknowledging it with a nod and a small smile. The moment was unremarkable in itself, yet profoundly significant. It marked the beginning of accountability and recognition that had been absent for years. The recording, now safely backed up in multiple locations, felt less like a burden and more like a tool of empowerment. I began reflecting on the impact it had beyond the courtroom, how listening to my own voice, hearing the subtle cues of tension, fear, and assertiveness had forced me to recognize my own strength. It was strange to think that a few minutes of audio could catalyze such a deep internal awakening, reshaping the way I understood my role in the family and in life. During one quiet evening, I sat by the window, notebook in hand, jotting down reflections about the past weeks. I wrote about the anger I had felt during the slap, the fear that had followed, and the clarity that emerged from documentation and legal scrutiny. Each sentence was a step toward understanding, not just my family's dynamics, but my own emotional responses and boundaries. The act of writing, paired with the recording, became a form of therapy, helping me process complex feelings in a structured, intentional way. Small, almost mundane incidents revealed the lasting changes in our household. My mother began leaving notes of encouragement in the kitchen, small gestures acknowledging my autonomy. One note simply read, "Thank you for being honest today." Jason started participating in family chores without prompting, his previous sense of entitlement tempered by the court experiences. I observed these changes quietly, aware that transformation was gradual and that respect and understanding were fragile, cultivated over time rather than demanded instantly. I also began noticing changes in myself. I felt lighter, more assertive, and increasingly comfortable expressing my opinions. Decisions that once felt like mine to argue quietly about finances, household responsibilities, personal boundaries, now felt within my rightful control. Even minor disputes no longer triggered anxiety. Instead, I approached them with calm deliberation, reflecting on how far I had come in understanding my own needs and limitations. One afternoon, I decided to revisit the recording, not for court purposes, but for personal reflection. I listened to the slap, the words, the hesitant tones, and the pauses, allowing myself to feel every emotion once more. But instead of pain, I noticed resilience. The recording was a mirror of my growth, a chronicle of courage under pressure, and a testament to the power of witnessing one's own truth. I realized that this small act of recording, initially intended as protection, had become a key instrument in my self-discovery and empowerment. Unexpectedly, new challenges emerged. Jason, now more reflective, approached me with a difficult question. "Leah, how do we rebuild trust with Mom without losing the progress we've made?" His concern was genuine, revealing a newfound maturity, yet it also underscored the complexity of healing. I explained that it required patience, acknowledgement, and consistent effort from all parties. Trust, I told him, wasn't restored overnight. It was rebuilt through repeated acts of honesty and respect. In the evenings, the house felt quieter than ever before. I found myself walking slowly through rooms, observing subtle details that had once been invisible. The sunlight hitting the countertops, the faint scent of Max's fur after a walk, the way my mother's hands trembled slightly when she poured tea, a gentle reminder of vulnerability and growth. I realized that healing wasn't just about conflict resolution. It was about mindfulness, awareness, and accepting imperfections in oneself and others. I began setting personal routines to nurture this transformation. Early morning walks, journaling, and reflection became sacred spaces where I could process emotions, strategize interactions, and reinforce boundaries. Each day, I felt more confident in navigating complex relationships, more attuned to my own needs, and more capable of fostering harmony without compromising my integrity. Even small successes, like a calm conversation with my mother about finances or a shared laugh with Jason in the kitchen, felt monumental, reinforcing that change was possible, gradual, and sustainable. Unexpectedly, the legal processes sparked curiosity in me about broader personal growth. I began reading about communication, family dynamics, and emotional intelligence, applying the insights directly to interactions at home. I experimented with active listening, compassionate dialogue, and non-confrontational boundary setting. Each success, no matter how minor, reaffirmed that self-discovery is an ongoing journey informed by reflection, observation, and deliberate action. Max became an unexpected companion in this process. His quiet presence reminded me to pause, to breathe, to appreciate simple joys even amidst tension. During walks, I reflected on the courtroom sessions, the recording, and the subtle transformations within my household. The rhythmic sound of his paws on pavement became a grounding mantra, connecting me to the present moment and reinforcing that growth often emerges from small, consistent actions rather than dramatic gestures. One evening, my mother initiated a conversation about her own reflections. "Leah, I've been thinking about how I handled things. I realize now that I often imposed my fears on you and Jason. I want to change to support, not control." Her words were tentative, yet sincere. I listened carefully, acknowledging her effort without immediately dissolving into past grievances. The exchange marked a critical milestone in mutual recognition and evolving family dynamics. I also began noticing shifts in my emotional resilience. Previously, conflicts would trigger intense anxiety, but now I approached situations with a measured mindset. I recognized my own triggers, reflected on underlying emotions, and responded deliberately rather than reactively. The recording, once a tool for protection, had become a catalyst for cultivating emotional intelligence, shaping not only my interactions, but also my inner stability. A subtle, almost cinematic moment occurred one morning while preparing breakfast. The sunlight streamed through the window, casting long shadows on the countertop. My mother hummed softly while pouring coffee. Jason quietly toasted bread, and I watched the small, ordinary choreography of our lives. I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not because everything was perfect, but because we were moving forward, navigating the aftermath of conflict with intention and care. Weeks passed, and the residual tension from the legal storm gradually eased. The recording remained safely stored, a reminder of past struggles, yet its influence had shifted. It was no longer a looming presence, but a silent testament to courage, clarity, and the transformative power of standing up for oneself. Each family member had begun assuming responsibility for their actions, learning to communicate without coercion, and acknowledging the impact of past behaviors. I realized that the experience had given me a deeper understanding of myself. The slap, the recording, the courtrooms, they were not just isolated events, but a crucible that had refined my sense of agency, empathy, and resilience. I had discovered that truth, honesty, and self-respect were not just ideals, but practical tools for navigating complex relationships and asserting personal boundaries. Late one night, I reflected on how much I had changed. I could feel the lingering strength of my voice, the confidence that had grown from speaking truth under pressure, and the subtle shifts in family dynamics that were now becoming the new normal. I understood that self-discovery was less about dramatic revelations and more about consistent, intentional choices, choosing honesty over avoidance, clarity over confusion, and respect over resentment. By the end of that month, our household had settled into a delicate but hopeful rhythm. Jason had become more considerate, my mother more reflective, and I more grounded. The recording, once a silent witness, had helped guide us toward accountability, understanding, and transformation. I realized that while the legal storm had passed, the real victory lay in the ongoing process of self-discovery and emotional resilience. I stood by the window one evening, watching the sun set over the neighborhood. The sky was painted with warm oranges and soft purples, and I felt an unexpected peace. My hand rested lightly on the folder containing the recording, a symbol not of conflict, but of empowerment. I smiled faintly, knowing that the journey had been difficult, but it had also led to a profound understanding. The courage to document, speak, and reflect could transform even the most painful experiences into opportunities for growth. Standing at the edge of the kitchen window, I watched the late afternoon sun stretch its golden fingers across the quiet neighborhood, bathing everything in a warm, forgiving light. The house was unusually still, almost contemplative, as if it, too, had absorbed the lessons of the past weeks. I traced the outline of familiar furniture, the small scratches in the countertop, the lingering scent of coffee, and felt a profound shift within myself. Every corner of this home, once heavy with tension, now felt like a canvas of possibility. I realized that what had started as an act of fear, the slap, the recording, had transformed into a journey of empowerment, clarity, and self-discovery. I could finally see the subtle threads that bound my family together. Love tangled with expectation, care often mixed with control, and resilience hidden beneath layers of frustration and guilt. I understood, in a way I never had before, that family dynamics were not static. They were fluid, influenced by honesty, courage, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths. I thought about the recording itself, the small device that had captured so much more than a slap. It had become a mirror, reflecting the rawness of human emotion, the anger, the fear, the vulnerability that we often hide from one another. It had forced me to confront my own boundaries, to recognize my voice as valid, and to stand firm even when it felt impossible. It had also given my mother and Jason a silent yet undeniable message that actions have consequences, and that understanding begins with acknowledgement. I realized that truth, when expressed calmly and documented carefully, could cut through years of miscommunication and assumptions, creating space for healing that had seemed unattainable before. Even as the legal storm faded into memory, its effects lingered like an invisible thread weaving through our daily lives. Conversations became more intentional, expressions of gratitude and apology no longer rare, and small acts of kindness carried weight and meaning. I noticed my mother pausing before speaking, choosing words more deliberately, while Jason began listening rather than reacting impulsively. And I, once timid, hesitant, and burdened by unspoken resentment, had learned to assert myself without fear, to navigate conflict without aggression, and to approach relationships with both honesty and empathy. The journey had not erased mistakes, and it would not make the path forward effortless, but it had instilled something far more valuable, a sense of agency, clarity, and resilience that no slap, argument, or misunderstanding could undo. Looking back, I understood that self-discovery is rarely a single dramatic moment. It is a series of choices, reflections, and deliberate actions, each building upon the other until you recognize your own strength. That afternoon in the kitchen, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, I felt gratitude, not just for the recording or the courtroom validation, but for the painful, transformative process that had brought me here. I smiled softly, knowing that the past had been honored, that boundaries had been set, and that my voice, once overlooked, was finally heard and respected. The storm had passed, but I carried its lessons forward: courage, honesty, and the unwavering belief that standing up for yourself is not just an act of defiance, but a declaration of self-worth and an invitation for genuine connection.